Here we go. From the Silver Creek Studios, I'm Jared, and this is the BFIBs Almanac. An exciting day. It is March 28th, opening day all across baseball, unless you count the first couple games in Japan, which we're not going to count. So today is opening day, and unfortunately, the Cardinals lost a close one to the Milwaukee Brewers, 5-4 up in Milwaukee. But it was kind of exciting, kind of not. We'll get into that. So we had this year's ace, Mikolas, facing off against Milwaukee's ace, Chacin. And it was not what we expected to see for Mikolas. He only went 5 innings, had 5 earned runs, gave up 5 hits, 1 walk, which is, kind of typical for him, 3 strikeouts, but 3 home runs. One of which was to the opposing pitcher, so you never want to see that. But Yelich and Moose also hit home runs, so not a great outing by Mikolas. Not a horrible outing other than those home runs. He did pretty well, but you don't like to see him starting off only going 5 innings, giving up 5 earned. Chacin, on the other hand, he also went 5 1/3, but only gave up 3 earned runs on 2 homers. Colton Wong, who also had another homer later in the game, and Bader hit back-to-back homers in the second inning. Chacin had 2 walks and 7 strikeouts, so a little bit better outing for him than Mikolas. And the other pitcher of note in that game would be Hader, who ended up getting the save, closing the game out in the 8th and 9th for the Brewers, and was filthy, unhittable basically, until the end, but we'll get to that. So, as we mentioned, Colton Wong was 2 for 3 with 2 home runs, and they were no-doubters. He jacked them, and it was very exciting to see in that second inning. And on the very next pitch, Harrison Bader hit another no-doubter, even further out than Wong's first one. So very exciting to see those two guys start off on a good note. I've been very critical of Harrison Bader's offense this spring, and I know that was what he kind of had been working on most. Doing a lot of work with the new hitting coach, Jeff Albert. So good to see him get off to a good start. He was also 2 for 3. He hit a laser into left field, and I think maybe could have had another hit. He ended up trying to bunt and almost ran it out. It was a very good bunt later on, but so good to see him getting going. The only other player to have a hit in the game was Marcell Ozuna. He was 1 for 4. So other than that, there was a lot of offers put up and a lot of strikeouts. Overall in the game, the Cardinals had 11 strikeouts. Goldschmidt and DeYoung both had 3 strikeouts. Carp, Fowler, and Ozuna each had 1. Mikolas had 2 in there, so that kind of padded the Brewers' strikeout totals. But so not what you hoped to see on opening day. A lot of strikeouts, not a lot of hits, but we did see the exciting home runs. So it turns out all of the runs for both teams today were scored off of home runs, including, not including, but what was almost another home run in the bottom of the 9th. So, as we mentioned, Hader came in and pitched the 8th, and he was lights out, 1, 2, 3, 3 up, 3 down. He made Goldschmidt look silly with some 97-mile-an-hour fastballs right down the middle. Now, to the Cardinals' credit, the sun was shining in the afternoon. Even with the dome there, the windows let that sun in. And it was tricky. The sun was on the hitters in the faces of right-handed batters, and there was a strong shadow on the pitcher in the pitcher's mound. Now, as we got into the 9th, that shadow sort of started to move behind the pitcher's mound to where pretty much everything from the pitcher to the plate was lit up, but there were still some kind of funky shadows going on. But definitely in the 8th, it looked very difficult. You could tell the hitters were having a hard time picking up the ball. Now, he was also throwing gas, 96, 97 from the left side, so that's hard to hit anyway, but these guys were just sort of flailing at it and not making contact. So that was not good to see. But, maybe you'll give him a pass. I don't know. But in the ninth inning with 2 outs and Colton Wong set to come up, the decision was, should you pinch hit for Colton Wong, who bats left-handed, facing a nasty left-handed pitcher, or should you let him hit because he's already hit 2 home runs in the game and seems locked in? Well, Schilt ended up going with Jose Martinez, and they questioned it on the broadcast, or Brad Thompson at least said, he would go with his gut instinct, which is to let the hot hitter hit. But then they pointed out Colton Wong is 0 for 3 against Hader, and Jose Martinez is 2 for 3 with a home run, and that factored into the decision, obviously. So Martinez came to the plate with 2 outs, nobody on, cards down, 1 run, and he got a hold of an outside fastball and drove it to right center. Looked like it was going out. I actually thought it was going well out, but it just barely cleared the wall before Lorenzo Cain came up and brought it back. He made a tremendous play, took a long route to it, timed his jump perfectly, and brought it back over the wall for the final out to close out the game. So very frustrating as a Cardinals fan to see how close we were to tying that game up. And if we had, I assume the momentum would be on our side. You never know, but at least you'd still be alive. So kind of exciting to see. So like I said earlier, it was sort of an exciting game, but sort of not. You had all these home runs. You had this back and forth momentum. You had the exciting finish. It didn't turn out good for the Cardinals, but at the same time, you saw a lot of strikeouts, not a lot of balls put in play, and an overall kind of lackadaisical offense from the Cardinals. So sort of a mix of the two, but, there were some positive notes. Dominic Leone pitched the bottom of the 6th and faced 2 lefties. So he was one of the guys that we talked about with the Cardinals only having 1 lefty in the pen, that some of these guys would be counted on to get lefties out, and Leone is one of those guys. And he did very well. He faced 2 lefties, 3 up, 3 down. He had a strikeout of the right-handed hitter that he faced, but both lefties grounded out. So he looked very effective. What I thought was interesting was that John Gant pitched in the 8th with 2 lefties coming up. And we were only down 1 run. If we don't get that run back, then we wouldn't even be facing them in the 9th. So this was sort of that closeout situation. Seems like a scripted situation for Andrew Miller, the only lefty in the pen. It was the heart of the Brewers' order. Again, like I said, 2 lefties. You had Yelich and Shaw were the 2 lefties, with Ryan Braun mixed in between them. So I was a little surprised not to see Miller, and then even more surprised to see Gant, who was really kind of labeled as the long relief guy. So maybe that was their thought. If he gets through the 8th and we can somehow tie it in the 9th, then Gant would keep pitching in a tie situation and give him 3-4 innings if needed. Maybe. To me, I'd rather get those guys out and bring Gant in if you end up tying it. But I don't know. He ended up getting out of it. I believe he gave up 1 hit, but he did get out of the inning with no damage, no real threat. So, it worked out. I was just a little surprised. It seemed like this is the situation that we brought Miller in for, signed him for, only to not use him. So we'll see if there was any explanation given for that. So all in all, a little bit of what we expected to see from some of the pitchers, not what we expected to see from other pitchers. What we hoped to see, but I don't think expected to see from Wong and Bader, and not what we expected to see from some of the other offensive players, Karp, Goldschmidt, Young, Ozuna. So, little surprises here and there, met expectations in other places. So up next, game 2, we're going to have Jack Flaherty and Freddie Peralta, both 23-year-olds. I think Peralta turns 23 in a couple months, but couple young guys, young horses facing off, and Peralta was 6-4 last year with a 4.25 ERA in just 16 appearances. So not as good a numbers as Flaherty. I mean, he had the winning record, but the ERA was quite a bit higher. So should be interesting to see. I think he had a good spring for Milwaukee, and should be fun to watch a couple young fireballers out there in game 2. So, speaking of the Brewers, I wanted to kind of give a brief recap of division opponents. So, I'm not going to go through the entire division right now, but just talk about a couple of them. The key opponents being the Brewers and the Cubs. The Brewers were 96 and 67 last year with that extra play-in game. So, they were first place in the division. And one of the key signings they had in the offseason was Yasmani Grandal, their catcher. So, he came from LA. And he is coming off a career offensive year in a lot of the offensive categories. And by all accounts, is considered one of the better offensive catchers in the league. So he's definitely going to help their already potent offense. I'm not sure how highly regarded he is defensively, but I think he'll be serviceable. His main asset to the team is going to be his offense. The other kind of move that they made was to bring back Mike Moustakas, who was a free agent. He did end the season with the Brewers last year and played well in the playoffs, but they brought him back on another one-year deal to play second base. So he's normally been a third baseman. We've talked about the Cardinals' interest in him as a third baseman over the years, but he's going to play second for the Brewers. And other than that, I don't really feel like they made a lot of moves, no big acquisitions. There's rumors that the Brewers might try to bring in Craig Kimbrell, who is still available, and especially since the Brewers have had some injuries in their bullpen. So specifically, Corey Knebel is probably out for the year. He's going to decide Friday whether or not to have Tommy John or just rest or some other therapy. But my prediction is he's going to be out for the year and have surgery. Jeremy Jeffress is out a few more weeks, and Jimmy Nelson is out probably 1 to 2 more weeks. So their bullpen is really kind of in rough shape right now. Now they've got Hader, the power lefty that they went to today, but he pitched 2 innings, so I assume he's not going to be available tomorrow, and who knows for the rest of the weekend. So that's going to be interesting for them. They relied a lot on Hader last year, and they're going to need to rely on him a lot this year until they start getting some of these other guys back. And really, that's kind of what the Brewers are going to rely on is their bullpen. Well, that's what they relied on last year was their bullpen. Now, they put up a lot of runs. Their starting pitching was just okay. In fact, they only had one starter last year with double-digit wins, and that was Chacin, the starter today. And they only had 2 starting pitchers with an ERA of 3.5 or lower. So their starting pitching was not all that great. The guys that they've brought into their 5-man rotation this year don't have a big track record of great numbers. So I don't think their starting rotation is going to be necessarily a strength. All that being said, they won 96 games last year. But a lot of that was putting up a lot of runs early and their bullpen kind of shutting teams down. Well, I don't know if they're going to be able to rely on that bullpen as much this year. So we'll see what they end up doing with that. But it'll be interesting. So the Brewers are definitely, obviously, as we saw today, going to be a contender and a tough challenge for the Cardinals. The other big team in the division, as we all know, is the Chicago Cubs. They were 95 and 68. Again, that 1-game playoff against the Brewers, which they lost last year. Took second in the division. They have a $205 million payroll, which is the second highest in all of baseball. And that is a big reason why they did not make any significant moves this offseason. They did bring in Daniel Descalso on a $5 million contract, but that's about it. They didn't make many other moves. Teams or fans were hoping they'd go after Bryce Harper, Craig Kimbrell. There was a lot of big names attached to the Cubs, and they made it pretty clear pretty early on they were not going to be making any moves. They were going to go with the team that they had. Which, with 95 wins last year, it's hard to complain about sticking with what you got. That team was pretty good for them, and a lot of people think the Cubs underachieved last year. So if they feel like they can, not underachieve, if not overachieve, at least do what their expectations are, they should be pretty good. Now, that being said, they are relying on some guys getting healthy again, like Chris Bryant. Now, it looks like he is healthy. He hit a home run today. He had a good spring. I think he's going to be back to what we've seen from him in the past. But they also need to get their pitching staff healthy. It looks like Darvish is good to go again. He is dealing with a blister right now, but I think he's ready to pitch on Saturday, which is their next game. But they've got guys like Montgomery and Morrow in the pen who are dealing with various degrees of injuries. shoulder and elbow. And, they really got to get that bullpen solidified. That's been a weakness for them in the past. And as their rotation starts to age, guys like John Lester, who did pitch pretty well today, he got the win. But I think they're going to have to really put together a pitching staff that can keep them ahead. I think their offense is going to be fine. In fact, we're going to talk about that in a minute. But they've got a lot of aging veteran pitchers: Lester, Quintana, Hamels. Who's the other guy I'm thinking of? I don't know offhand, but they've got some 8 pitchers that are getting older and some offensive players that are getting older. So we'll see. They've got plenty of youth too, and they're going to be very good overall. In fact, they scored 12 runs today in their first game. Baez hit 2 homers. Bryant had a homer. They put up a ton of runs. And in their final spring training game, they scored 16 runs. And their third to last spring training games, they scored 24 runs. So I don't think the Cubs are going to have a hard time scoring runs this year, much like the Brewers. It's really going to come down to their pitching. Can their pitching keep them in games? One thing of note is that the Cubs do have 3 left-handed starters in their rotation. And as we have seen for many years now, the Cardinals seem to struggle infinitely more than other teams against left-handed pitching. So we'll see. They've obviously brought in guys like Goldschmidt, who will offer some protection and can kind of get the whole lineup going. But and the Cardinals do have a lot of right-handed hitters. But anytime you see a rotation with 5 effective left-handed pitchers, it always makes me kind of nervous. So I think the Cubs are going to be good again. I think the Cardinals are going to be good. We're talking, we need to see 95 wins, right, to compete in this division. It's not, I don't think we can all expect the Brewers and the Cubs to get 95 wins again. That's a high total that's hard to achieve any year, much less in a competitive division. And as we see teams like the Reds, who have been, kind of doormats for the last few years, I think they're going to be much improved. I don't think they're going to be contenders to win the division, but they aren't going to be walked over like they have in the past. So it's going to be tough to get 95 wins, but I think that's what the goal needs to be for any of these teams to hope to win the division. So are the Cardinals a 95-win team? I think they can be. I think they've got deep pitching. They've got a deep offense with plenty of power off the bench. And if guys like Fowler and Bader and Wong and Ozuna can kind of get going and stay hot, then they can stay, they'll be right in the race with these other teams. But there are a lot of question marks on the Cardinals, and we will see how these guys start off the season and whether they can get hot. So with 4 games to go against the Brewers here to start the season, and they've actually got 10 games against the Brewers in the first, I think it's 24 games, maybe 28 games. They've got a lot of games against the Brewers in the first month of the season, and that could kind of make or break your season. If you play 10 games against the Brewers and lose 7 of them, that's a huge swing that is going to have repercussions later in the year. You hate to say, in the first 2-3 weeks of the season that you make or break your season, but when you're playing your division opponents and they're going to be tough, you better steal some of those wins. So we almost stole one today. We almost at least tied it up. Had it exciting. Good to see Martinez come off the bench and drive the ball hard. So anyway, that is my first podcast of the regular season for the 2019 Cardinals. So I think we're going to try to do, game recaps and then try to break down a few details that maybe aren't discussed in the game, or talk about some things that if you weren't watching, you might not have picked up on, like the fact that some of these hitters really didn't look good today. Particularly Goldschmidt. I mean, he did have a walk, but he just looked overmatched against Hader. And he struck out looking on his first 2 appearances. One on the third strike was on the outer half, and then the next strikeout, the third strike was on the inner half. He kind of had some words with the umpire. I think the zone was pretty big, but you don't like to see him go down looking 2 at-bats in a row. Again, it's early. He's trying to get dialed in, but he was pretty dialed in spring at the end there. So Carpenter, same thing. He was 0 for 4 with a strikeout. He doesn't seem to be having the ill effects of his back tightness, yet he also went hitless on the day. So, is he comfortable? I don't know. We'll see. He could definitely go, 3 for 4 tomorrow, and we'd say everything's fine. But if he goes, 0 for again tomorrow, I think you'd have to start wondering, is he as healthy as he claims to be with his back? So we shall see. I'm going to look forward to watching Game 2, see what Jack Flaherty can do. Hopefully get us in the win column to start off the season. So, all right. Well, feel free to contact the show and give me any suggestions or anything you want to talk about, some topics or in-depth information. And I appreciate you guys listening. So until next time, I'm Jared, and this is the BFIBs Almanac.